So the California ammunition ban case is once again up for consideration in front of the Ninth Circuit en banc panel. But we also have some great news in this case because the Trump DOJ has now jumped in this case to support this challenge, and they argue that this state ammo restriction and these restrictions with background checks need to be struck down. So let's talk about what is happening in this critical case. Now, before we jump into this video, if you guys want to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is simply to subscribe. Also, double check to make sure YouTube is not unsubscribed you because they love to do that, especially on two-way channels. I also want to thank one of the main supporters of this channel, which is Attorneys on Retainer. When it comes to self-defense protection, in my opinion, AOR is in a league of their own. They're backed by an actual law firm, the Attorneys for Freedom, and they're always expanding upon their benefits to give you the most out of your membership. In fact, one of the new things that they added is that they are guaranteeing 4 attorneys to your self-defense case, which is something that no other company is offering. So again, if you're interested, check them out using the link down below in the details section or in the pinned comment. And if you sign up using my code ARMEDSCHOLAR, you can get $25 off of your sign-up fee. As I mentioned in the intro, in this video, I have an important update in the California ammo ban case called Rody versus Bonta. Now, you may remember that last year, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that California's ammo ban and these restrictions are in fact a violation of the Second Amendment. But like what happens every single time that we get a positive pro-2A ruling in the Ninth Circuit en banc panel has now decided to take review of this case. Currently, the Ninth Circuit en banc panel has set oral arguments to happen in this case on March 23rd. So, really soon, this is going to be argued in front of the en banc panel. And in response to that, both the pro-2A side and the, California Gavin Newsom side are submitting their arguments to get the panel to rule in their favor. But we also have some great news in this case for our side, and that's because the Trump administration, through Harmeet Dillon, have decided to file an amicus brief, and they're arguing that the panel here in the Ninth Circuit should rule and strike down these ammunition restrictions. This is great to see, and it may go a long way to finally get, the Ninth Circuit or potentially, even the Supreme Court eventually to find that these ammo restrictions do in fact violate the Second Amendment and that they need to be struck down. Now, if you're not aware, this Rody versus Bonta case deals with the state of California's restrictions on the purchase of ammunition and also the background check system that they currently have in place. This provision was passed through Proposition 63, which requires that purchasers of ammunition need to undergo one of 2 background checks to confirm that they can legally purchase ammunition. There is the basic eligibility check and the standard eligibility check, both coming with a different fee that you have to pay, and one also potentially with a delay. This law in California also restricts the ability for someone to be able to purchase ammunition online and then have it shipped directly to your front door. In California, we can't do that. Instead, we have to go to an FFL and run a background check every single time we want to purchase ammunition. Now, on review, Judge Roger T. Benitez in the district court, issued his ruling, and originally on review this case, he found that, there was no text, history, or tradition to support this California ammunition restriction. Now, after that first ruling, the state of California appealed that decision up to the Ninth Circuit, and oral arguments were held all the way back on November of 2020, and that was held in front of a 3-judge panel in the Ninth Circuit, but the ruling was eventually put on hold, and then after the Supreme Court issued their 6-3 ruling in Bruin, the Rody case was then remanded back down to Judge Benitez for a new ruling in light of what the Supreme Court just said in Bruin. Judge Benitez then, reviewed the case once again and issued essentially the same ruling. And you may also remember that out of that new ruling by Judge Benitez, we got kind of this freedom weekend in the state of California where everyone was able to order online, ammunition and get it sent directly to our front doors, and they could go to gun stores without having to run those background checks, but that lasted only for potentially I think it was a weekend. And then eventually the Ninth Circuit decided to put a stay on that ruling. Now, this case eventually went to a 3-judge panel in the Ninth Circuit who reviewed this case, and that new decision by the 3-judge panel essentially ruled in our favor and once again struck down the California ammo ban as unconstitutional. Now, after that ruling by the Ninth Circuit 3-judge panel, we all knew that California would seek en banc panel review because that's what they always do. And the Ninth Circuit, en banc panel especially, has a very long track record of reversing any pro-2A ruling that we get in our favor. Like I mentioned, this case was granted review by the Ninth Circuit en banc panel and was set for oral arguments, which will take place on March 23rd. But we also got some great news and some great help from the Trump administration through an amicus brief that they just filed in this case. I will also note that it's going to be interesting to see if the Trump DOJ also requests through a motion to participate during the oral arguments in this Rody case, because we've seen that the Trump DOJ has participated in various two-way oral arguments in the past, like in Illinois with PICA, and then currently they're also seeking to argue in front of the Supreme Court in the Wolford concealed carry case. Now, in that brief submitted by the Trump DOJ, they argue that California's point-of-sale background check system for ammunition directly violates the Second Amendment because the right to keep and bear arms necessarily includes the right to acquire ammunition. They state that without ammunition, firearms are not operable, making the constitutional right meaningless. Under the Supreme Court's Bruin framework, the DOJ explains that laws regulating conduct essential to exercising the Second Amendment automatically trigger constitutional scrutiny, regardless of how severe the burden is. They state that California's regime imposes recurring fees, short authorization windows, unpredictable delays, and widespread erroneous denials, all of which substantially interfere with lawful citizens obtaining and exercising two-way rights. They state that because there is no historical tradition which exists of requiring that you get a background check every single time that you purchase ammunition, they argue and conclude that the law fails the historical analog test required under Bruin and that this law cannot stand. The DOJ also argues that California's ammunition system is unconstitutional because it serves no legitimate regulatory purpose and it instead is actually designed to frustrate the exercise of this constitutional right. They state that historical sources, founding era commentary, and the Supreme Court precedent all draw a very clear line between legitimate regulation and unlawful infringements, especially when the law operates as a pretextual barrier rather than a genuine public safety measure. And they demonstrate that the real effect of this is simply to discourage, lawful gun ownership, lawful gun owners from accessing and getting ammunition for lawful purposes like self-defense or target shooting or hunting, and really meets no other purpose. It does not stop crime at all. It does not stop prohibited persons, and all the data shows that none of those claimed interests are actually met by this law. They argue that because this ammunition background check regime is actually tailored to restrict two-way rights and to prevent you from getting ammunition rather than actually regulating anything or meeting any public interest, the Ninth Circuit here, the en banc panel, should rule in favor of the plaintiffs here. They should rule in favor of Kim Rody and the organizations and agree with the lower courts that this law needs to be struck down. So this is great news in this case, and there is no doubt that those DOJ arguments will pop up during the oral arguments in the en banc panel, especially if the DOJ is not present during those arguments. Now, there is also one other wrinkle in this that I want to mention. Currently, you have both a rifle ban and a magazine ban, one actually out of California, which are seeking to get Supreme Court review on those issues, and those are going to conference this Friday. If at any point either of those two cases are granted, I have no doubt that this ammo ban case will also be put on hold by the en banc panel. Now, I will state that that generally would not be a horrible thing, because one good thing is, of course, you would get the Supreme Court to review a major two-way case that we've been waiting for a really long time. But also with the hold in that situation, you would also potentially prevent the en banc panel from, skirting this issue, since they generally have no fear right now of Supreme Court repercussions or them taking these critical issues. So if, they had a rifle ban or a magazine ban in front of them, it would be a good thing. And then you would also get a hold in this case, and potentially just a hold to see what the Supreme Court rules. And then you would get an analysis in this case in light of what the Supreme Court says, and potentially the rifle ban or the magazine ban. But that's something that we're going to have to be watching closely, and we'll be watching this case closely also going forward to see how all of this develops. So as we get more information, as this develops, I will let you guys know. If you like this video and you would like to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is simply to like, comment, and subscribe. All of those things help to fuel the algorithm. Also, you can check out one of the two videos here on the screen that the YouTube algorithm thinks that you'll find helpful. But as always, thank you so much for all of your support, and never forget, this nation was built by armed scholars, and this nation will be maintained by armed scholars.